Home electrification solutions. This is an introduction to home electrification, why it's an important topic in a world of so many competing needs. My name is Tom Coleman. I'm from the Climate Reality Project Chicago Metro chapter. So when we move ahead here, this is part 5 of a 7-part series dealing with various things like the emissions itself, the solutions, from an overview point of view, and then moving into the home energy or electricity, electric vehicles. Now we're going to move inside the home and talk about the devices and machines inside the home. And then part 6 would get into how we can move from the fossil fuel pledge that most people have taken and move to the electrification pledge and what the difference is, how to transition, how to do that transition. So the agenda today would be the solutions overview, and then we would talk specifically about heat pumps for heating and air conditioning. We talk about heat pumps for water heating, heat pumps for clothes drying, and induction stoves. Talk about the incentives, and then we will conclude. Now, clean and green homes depend on must stop burning things, just like we said with our vehicles. We want to move away from this concept that we think we have to just burn things. We have to buy fossil fuel things and then put it in machines and burn them. So the breakdown, though, would be heating about 20% of the energy used, 17% for cooling, water heating 14%, appliances 13%, lighting 12%, and electronics 4%, which is very close to the emissions actually of these areas. And we'll focus in on the home heating and cooling, the water heating and the clothes drying and the induction stoves. And the sales are going very good. So what do people want? This study indicates that do people want all their major appliances to be electric, or do they want most of their appliances to be electric? That's an interesting breakdown. So let's take a look at that. So 75% of liberal Democrats want it to be either all the major appliances, 39%, or 36% mostly. Moderate or conservative Democrats drop back a little bit to 64%. And then independents, about the same mix. And then conservative Republicans are at 50% with a 27-22 split. Liberal moderate Republicans would be 53%. And then no party is 45%, which is kind of surprising that usually it's parties that kind of like, make a difference as to what people do. But no party seems to have the biggest influence of what not to do or what to do here. And then geography, rural 54, suburban 61, urban 65. In the total population, about 31% want all the major appliances to be electric. 29%, almost the same amount, want most of them to be electric, for a total of 60%. Now, when we look at this chart that we've been kind of going through in our previous presentations, we see that 75% of the emissions here in green are things that we can deal with right now today. You don't have to worry about, do we have the right technologies? Do we have, can we do these things? And the answer is we can, and 42% of it can be decisions at the kitchen table. Most of the solutions are available. We'll focus over here today at clean business and industry, mostly focusing on the buildings though. And then clean buildings will be your homes, about 140 million buildings. And we'll talk about the machines in these buildings, which last 10 to 20 years typically. So now we'll take the breakdown here for the home. The home heating and cooling, about 17%. And other home energy use, about 15%, for a total of about 15.4 metric tons. And as a reminder, a metric ton is 2,200 pounds. So we're talking about 30,000 plus pounds of emissions in a typical year. And that all would break down. About 30% would be emissions would come from heating, 18% from cooling, 14% water heating, 12% lighting, and washer, dryer types of things would be about 6%. We won't deal much today about lighting because we're assuming that, many of us have replaced our LED light bulbs, and if you haven't, it's a good thing to do. We won't talk much about refrigerators, although obviously you want the most efficient. They're already electric. So we will talk about, dryers though. So in this, from to kind of grid that we have here, we'll be talking about the things at the top of the page that's circled in red. We'll talk about the methane gas furnaces, the methane gas water heaters, the 19 million gas stoves, the 120 million gas clothes dryers. And we want to transition, as we indicated in the previous slide, to the heat pump technologies. Primarily, that would be the technologies to take away the burning of fossil fuels. So that's what we'll focus on today. Now, how are these things selling? Well, for the first time last year or in 2022, heat pumps are now outselling gas furnaces. And they've actually been about tie with gas furnaces since 2020. So the good news is, as we have now on the market a focus on heat pumps, manufacturers are making heat pumps that can go lower and lower temperatures, because you see, heat pumps have been around. Heat pumps are proven technology, but when you get down about 30 degrees or 20 degrees, many heat pumps can't go that low. So they've been typically used in moderate type climates. Like in the south of the United States, they're really big. But now we have manufacturers making heat pumps with better compression technology that allow them to go, below zero and things like that. So they're doing well on a sales basis. In fact, talk about heat pumps being hotter and cooler than ever. Um, in October of 2023, gas furnaces sold 232,000 of them sold, versus 3.2 million heat pumps were sold. So in many cases, we're replacing heat pumps. It's not just when an old gas furnace is replaced, we replace it with a heat pump, which of course is a good thing. We're talking about replacing them proactively. Now, what do they look like? So a heat pump in your home attached to, say, your home ventilation system. And there are different types. Talk to contractors about this. But this is a typical one. The gas heater might look very much like a heat pump. Here's a heat pump here attached to the heating and ventilation system. And this individual, which we know well, Derek Ader, replaced his gas heater and plugged in here the heat pump. And this is the one he bought down here, a Mitsubishi. And then on the right-hand side is an example of the condenser that would be similar to what an air conditioner looks like outside, only typically they're vertical like this. And so the condenser works with the heat pump inside the house. They work together to get the job done. Because you see, a heat pump can heat and it can cool. So it not only replaces the air conditioner, but it also moves heat from one direction to the other, depending on what the residents need. So the principle here of the heat pump is, when you want them to cool, the heat pump would move heat from inside the home using a refrigerant. So you would have air blowing with fans over a refrigerant. It would heat up the refrigerant, and the refrigerant would be sent outside the home, just like an air conditioner, and the heat would be ejected from the home. And cool air would be brought inside the home and blow through the heating and ventilation system. So that's the direction it would be. Now, heating, it's just the opposite direction. Heat pumps move small amount of heat from outside. Now, even at 10 or 20 degrees, there's actually heat in the air. But what they do with that little bit of heat is they compress it so it gets wicked hot. And this refrigerant is brought into the house, it's wicked hot, and then it would blow through the heating and ventilation system to heat inside the home. So the main thing about heat pumps is they never burn fossil fuels. The era of burning things, especially fossil fuel things, is kind of over. And that's the main thing that we want to do with electrification. So we have to really applaud Governor Janet Mills from the state of Maine, because she said, when I took office in 2019, I set a goal of installing 100,000 heat pumps in Maine by 2025. But after reaching the goal in 2 years ahead of schedule, we now are on our way to our new target of 275,000 heat pumps by the time she leaves office. And congratulations, not a warm climate in winter in the state of Maine, and they're working. Now, the U.S. Climate Alliance is a bipartisan coalition of 25 governors, almost half the governors in the United States, now representing 60% of the U.S. economy and 55% of the U.S. population, agreed to collectively reach 20 million heat pump installations by 2030, with an aim of ensuring at least 40% of the benefits flow to disadvantaged communities. So this is really an excellent thing for everybody, including disadvantaged communities. Now, when we look at home heating from an emissions point of view, what does it look like? So in the green bar on the left, this would be methane gas heat uh, and, and an air conditioner. So it would be an average US gas heater plus the air conditioner would produce 11,500 pounds of emissions, which would be about 5.21 metric tons, depending on how you want to look at it. And that would be from the Department of Energy and the Energy Information Agency. Now, my calculation would be for Illinois, for us, it would be about 6.89 metric tons of emissions for the average gas heater here in the state of Illinois. Now, if we implement the heat pump and just plug it into the current dirty grid that we have, or largely dirty grid, that would still reduce the emissions down to about 3.51, almost 3 metric tons, which would be pretty significant reduction. And then if we move over to installing heat pump and then installing solar panels on our house, we would further drop that down to about 2.07. So again, no solution is a perfect solution, but heat pumps are a very good solution, as you can see in this picture. And remember, these numbers are every year. Every year, this is the reduction in emissions, which is very significant. So the reduction that we're talking about here is almost as much as a car, but just this item. Now, heat pump water heaters are a different kind of heat pump, and they work very similar, though, in terms of the principle. So warm air is brought in from your house into here, and the warm air heats up the refrigerant, and the refrigerant gets compressed and it gets wicked hot, and it goes down through these coils, the refrigerant, and it takes the cold water that's here and heats it up very much, and then the hot water goes out into your home and you use the water just like you would normally use with, let's say, a gas water heater. Only this time, instead of burning something to do this, we're compressing a refrigerant to do this. And so that's how the heat pump works. On the right-hand side, we have a picture of one. It's a heat pump water heater from Rheem. Climate Reality does not sanction any particular products. We're just using these as examples, just pulled, off the internet. This one here is at Home Depot for $17.53. So here it is. This is what it looks like. Plug it in, no gas. Now, what do the emissions look like for this heat pump water heater? So a methane gas water heater, which is about 2.2 metric tons of emissions every single year, would drop down to about 1.2 with the heat pump water heater, which would be largely from the emissions from the electric grid from ComEd or Ameren or whatever. But it would then be cut in half once again if the heat pump water heater was using solar, if the home was on solar power, either with rooftop solar again or a solar farm for like community solar installation. Now, solar isn't perfect. So in all these examples, I don't show perfection over here because there are times where there's snow on the panels. So I'm accounting for that in this reduction here. Still very good emissions reduction. Now let's move over to a couple of the last couple of electrified appliances that I want to point out. The one on the left is in this example is an LG heat pump clothes dryer, $8.99 at Best Buy. And these things are easy to install because there's no pipes like with a gas or an electric dryer. There's no need to put piping to outside the building to run this. They reduce energy as much as 28%, and they dry the laundry at a lower temperature than dryers or electric dryers or gas dryers. So it's a little gentler on the clothes. So in some cases, they have washers that once the washing is done, the washer converts to the heat pump and it's all one unit. In other types of installations, the washer would look much like this, and they would be stacked with the heat pump perhaps on top of the water in the washer. So that's kind of a little bit about the heat pump dryer. This is going to be one of our next moves in our home. And then on the right here would be an example of an induction stove. In this example would be a Samsung induction stove. For example, $899 over at ABT Electronics. These things used to cost $3,000, $4,000. They're now coming down because you're starting to get higher volumes of production, people buying these things. Now, they are an electric stove, and electric stoves, if you already have one, you could stay with that, that's fine. But these are more efficient than an electric stove. But an induction stove, compared to, say, a gas stove in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it's only marginally better. A gas stove is actually pretty efficient. However, there's no chance of carbon monoxide releases. There's no chance of natural gas in your home, nitrogen dioxide, no particulate matter in your home. And so this is pretty significant. It's mostly a pollution thing. Scientists are beginning to see in tests that gas heaters, I'm sorry, gas stoves are actually putting pollution in the kitchen because there's no rules about how much ventilation they require. They don't require any ventilation. So you could smell the natural gas when you turn the burners on, but it's what you don't smell in these monoxide and so forth. And there have been problems with defects with gas where you would have the potential of fires or explosions even in Lisle. I don't want to be an alarmist, but in Lisle, a house blew up recently. It blew to a million pieces because of a natural gas leak. And then there have been not fires, and there have been uh, problems with asphyxiation with carbon monoxide in people's homes because maybe it didn't burn properly. So with something like this, you really don't have a burner. What you have is they're powered by magnets and copper induction elements instead of magnets. And again, there's no burning. You have to use metal pans though, because the copper induction elements, what they do is they use electromagnets to heat the pan and not the top of the stove. Okay, if you want to try them out, some libraries are now starting to allow you to take it out just like a book, take out let's say a one burner induction stovetop here. And of course, they're really not burners. What you have here is heating elements that are underneath, a copper element that is an electromagnet, that when you put a metal pan on top of it and turn it on, it heats as quick, if not quicker than a gas stove, frankly. Here's an example for $62 if you want to buy it. And here's a two burner or a two element induction stove here. Some people buy these to try, and they put them on top of their stoves, and they never go back to the gas stove. They just use these from then on. So what's the timeline? Like we talked about a timeline like this for transportation. Now, when we talk about water heating and space heating and cooking, what does the timeline look like, especially for these over here? So if we, for example, for space heating, want to be net zero by 2050, it means with the increase projected in population, we have to go from about 120 million up to almost 140 million devices. So what we need is to go blue. The electric heat pumps have to ramp up pretty quickly by 2050 and take the place of delivered fuels like oil and natural gas and electric resistance types of heating systems, which are really not efficient. They're electric, but they're really not efficient. And if you were to back schedule about 15 years or so, it's similar to the car. Around 2035 is when we have to stop buying delivered fuel machines, stop buying electric resistance machines or natural gas machines, and go to electric heat pumps instead. That's kind of like the timeline in order to meet our emissions targets, which are at risk big time. Now, I wanted to just leave with you here the link at the bottom of the page for Rewiring America, which allows you to plug in for homeowner. Are you filing jointly? How many people in the home? What's your household income? What's your zip code? And then hit calculate and discover that I would be covered in this, if this was me, and it's not me, but I would be covered for 50% of the cost, so about $7,000 in upfront rebates or discounts. I would also likely be available $8,250 for tax credits, or about $1,200 a year. I mentioned the savings for my solar of about $1,100 a year. I mentioned my car, I think it was about $1,200 a year. So we're talking about another $1,200 a year potentially in savings per year. So the total incentives here would not count the savings from the car or the solar panels. It would be just for these devices. So now when we look at the rebates, they kick in this year. They kick in 2024. So the green lines would be the things we talked about. You can see how much they are. And then you could, on this website, you can press more info to get more information, obviously. And then depending on your income, low income would qualify for the full amount. Like suppose you had to upgrade your electric panel. The middle income would be 50%, and the high income people wouldn't qualify at all. But they would qualify probably for these tax credits over here, and battery storage, electric vehicle, rooftop solar, used EVs, heat pump water heaters, and all these kinds of things here. So again, just like the previous page, you hit more info to get more info. And then, so let's conclude this presentation. We want to cut costs and improve family budgets, right? Through home electrification. We want to save that money. We want to significantly reduce our home emissions by converting to heat pumps for home heating, for air conditioning, water heating, and clothes drying. We want to increase home safety, avoid the potential of fires or home explosions, or asphyxiation by eliminating natural methane gas from our homes. I don't want to overplay this. I do want to mention it because it happens. It's always in the news, but as a percentage of the number of homes out there, it actually does pretty good. But why take the risk? Why have gas in your home if you don't really need to? And that's actually the point here. Eliminating noxious pollution and emissions from our kitchens by moving to electric or electric induction stoves. So that's the conclusion. We want to move from the left. It's our choice to move away from these fossil fuel power plants with the sun beating down on our roofs and going nowhere, or sun beating down on our roofs, generating power to run the machines we've just talked about in our homes and run the transportation, the machines that we use to get around our cars. So here's the key references. I don't think I need to go through them again. They're here for you. A nice review from Leah Stokes, the Rewiring America sites, the links to our websites, and the EPA carbon footprint. So this, we're now concluding the home electrification solutions. Now we would like to help you move from these fossil fuel devices that many of us are still using today to the electric devices, and that would be the electrification pledge to help us move from the fossil fuel pledge that we make every time we buy a machine that uses fossil fuels, which is a long, decades-long investment, to electric machines. So that's where we want to go next. Thank you very much for your attention. This is the Climate Reality Project. Be the change you wish to see in the world.